Commutify presents Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Each week, we explore the challenging issues transportation demand management professionals face on their journey to transition commuters from driving alone to more sustainable, shared, and active commuting habits. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify. This is Between the Lines with Andy Keaton.
Hi, everyone, and welcome aboard to this week's Between the Lines podcast. Today, I'm joined by Prachi Vakharia. Prachi works on autonomous vehicle safety standards, digital and shared mobility projects, and electric mobility services and infrastructure. Today, she leads the implementation of AI and ML technologies at the MBTA and also builds safety protocols for SafeAI, an automation firm. We've got a lot of acronyms here, so stick with us. Previously, she led product and innovation at AES, another acronym, at a Fortune 100 energy firm as well, in the e-mobility division, and also developed EV standards for workplaces and fleets at Forth. Prior to that, Prachi worked with the World Bank on urban transport projects in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And beyond work, she serves on the board of mobility startups and leads committees at TRB and SAE. And she also co-founded Womanium, an organization that advances young women in the STEM domain. This is awesome. I love this bio. We're going to get into it a little bit. But today we are going to talk about why workplace EV charging will help save the planet. Before we get into that, thanks for being on today, Prachi.
So happy to be here. Thanks, Andy.
And, I think this bio deserves a little bit more of a conversation because this is very impressive and there's so much here. Can you tell me what is the common thread of all of this that you've done?
Well, there are three common threads. First is high impact. I think everything one does, right? You want to see the end results of it. So my work with the Massachusetts government, I know there'll be infrastructure that I can point to and say, this is something I helped create, and this is impacting millions of people today. And it started because I came to DC. I was working on actually US-EU climate negotiations. And let me tell you, climate negotiations take a long time to happen. You meet every year, you have discussions, and maybe once in 20 years, you get an agreement out of it. At the same time, I was observing another department, and then later I joined them because they were working on a very exciting project, which is called BRT systems. That's called Bus Rapid Transit Systems. And this is something in the city of Istanbul that we were designing and developing at the time. It's actually a really cool concept because if we think of it, like most cities around the world, they have roads, they have buses. And a lot of cities have a lot of people they need to move around. But of course, we associate buses with something that's slow, that's clunky, that's smelly, and will take forever to get you where you need to be. But a simple redesign, what we call BRT systems, where buses have their own dedicated lanes, they have preferential signaling, and a few other design elements completely change how many people they could serve. What used to be 3 hours of traffic in a city like Istanbul to go from one end to the other became 30 minutes because of our systems. So that taught me the value of doing high impact work that really makes an impact on people today. And 1 million people use the system every day today.
Wow.
So from there, it was fascinating work. And from there, I thought, well, everything I do needs to impact people locally. And at the end, right, you think locally, you act locally, but then you impact global emissions. So that's been kind of the key thing that I've always tried to do. But the second thread in all my work is being at the forefront of innovation. It's not enough to build the technologies of today. You have to look at the future. And things like vehicle electrification, automation, all of those are technologies of the future. So I've mentored and advised startups in the past. In fact, 3 of them we got acquired by Daimler, the German automaker that makes Mercedes-Benz. Acquired all 3 of the startups I mentored and advised in the past. And today I'm working with on EWEL. I'm advising a company that's focused on vehicle electrification from the Berkeley lab. I'm also advising another startup from California. So all really fun things. But it's again, keeping an eye not only on today, but what's at the horizon as well, I think is really important. And the third thing, that's like you and I, and I think all of us are really concerned of is how do we give back? And for me, giving back I've been very happy to work in the STEM fields, very exciting to see all the impact I've been able to make. And there are so many people, men and women, who are really excited in this field, but may not know exactly how to, again, be at the leading edge of their fields. So we started Womanium, a few of us from MIT in the Media Lab, We were always discussing like how did we get interested in science, and like can we push this excitement, can we get other people excited as well, because we get to see amazing challenges and think of different solutions to solve them. How do we get more people excited? So the answer for a lot of us was like early exposure. As a young child, I was visiting my father's factories, and I could see like how things were happening. And for different people, it could be like a really good science teacher that, really inspired you at, fourth grade or something, or it's like space camp that you went to. So this is what our experience was. And for us, it's like, how do you get then more people excited about science and train them with the very best? So we worked with groups like the National Institutes of Health. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the president of Pfizer as well as the head of NIH, National Institute of Health, Francis Collins, at an event that Womanium hosted. We've had programs with NASA
Wow.
on their James Webb Space Telescope. So we've had a lot of different and exciting programs, and all with
That's
the mission of bringing people to the cutting edge.
That's amazing. I love that. That's really cool. And that like your whole life journey is really impressive. I mean, it's really exciting to hear what you've done, and I'm excited to see what you continue to do. And you've been doing things all over the transportation industry. What trends have you seen? What are some of these emerging trends out there?
Yeah, there's the acronym in the transport industry that's really caught on, which is CEAVS, which is Connected Electric Automated Vehicles that are shared. So that's what the acronym shares for. But I'll share with you three trends from this acronym. First is the shared part. Let me start there because the startups I was advising were all in the shared mobility space. So these are companies like Uber, Lyft. These are companies like what Commutefy does as well, right? Like how do you enable the better usage of existing transportation um, to move more people, basically. So, it's one vehicle, one Uber vehicle, but that has so many trips that it can make. Things like micro transit as well, where again, you have a small shuttle or somewhat of a small shuttle, but that's also on demand. So mobility on demand. It's kind of related to
Mm-hmm.
shared mobility. The micro mobility sector itself, again, it's shared. You have all these scooters around your cities. People can hop on and hop off, and it's a great use of existing assets that more and more people can use. So that's shared mobility in a nutshell. But again, it's allowing for mobility on demand, so you can book a ride at any time using an application. It also has a part of like mass inside it, which is basically making it so that there's one platform to pay and access multiple services.
Sure.
So this is the shared mobility bucket. The other bucket is automated vehicles. Of course, I mean, this is the exciting trend, I think, of the decade. We've seen a lot of promises from companies like Waymo, Aurora, right? And like billions of dollars of evaluation, so much money these companies are raising. I think the promise is there, but it's not as close as what we've been promised. I don't think we're going to see automated vehicles by 2025 on our streets. In some domains, in some situations, automated vehicles do make sense, and those are the sectors that are going to be impacted first. So areas such as mining or construction areas or port areas, they are closed environments.
Mm-hmm.
It's very predictable. An operator typically has an overview of everything that's happening, and there's no unexpectedness or very limited unexpected events happening there. The other,
Right.
I think, in kind of the more civilian space, we'll see things like automated buses. So again, buses that have their own dedicated lanes, they can stop and pause, and we're seeing kind of like shuttle pilots and operational pilots as well in different areas and in different cities across North America. Airports as well are trying now automated shuttles, right? So they're looking at, well, we've had these like people movers for a long time, can we make them automated and make them more efficient? So those are the areas I think we'll see automation first. Passenger vehicles, you're jumping into your Tesla or any other vehicle you may have, pushing a button and taking you where it needs to go. That's going to take a lot more time. And that's also because I think the bigger part is because just the number of unexpected things that can happen on a
Yeah.
roadway, it's pretty high, especially in urban environments, but even on highways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, so Yeah, I mean, there's we could talk. We could have an entire episode just talking about these future trends that we expect to see. But
Right.
I let's talk about something that we all are seeing right now on the streets all the time, which is electric
Yeah.
vehicles.
Yes.
And this is a growing thing. I mean, it's been growing for a while, but now, I mean, I think everyone probably has some experience or knowledge or seen an electric vehicle at least, which is great. And I think that maybe the talking point of the last month has been this infrastructure bill in that's passed through the U.S. government over it took a while, but was finally done. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about how does this infrastructure bill impact EVs? What does it mean for the EV space?
Right. Well, just electrification itself, that's the other big trend of the CEAVS acronym. Electrification has been around for a long time, actually the last probably 30, 40, 50 years even. In fact, the first car that was made, one of the first few cars made by Benz, I think, was an electric car. So we've always had this desire to have electric cars that really allows you to offset local emissions. And ideally, you want that power source to also be renewable, right? So it means the energy is coming from a renewable source, and then where the car or the vehicle is driven is it's not polluting anything externally as well. So it just increases the reduces air pollution and increases quality of life for wherever that vehicle is driven. Also, they're much quieter, which is very nice, especially if you live in
Yeah.
a highway or a busy way. So electrification is a huge trend for sure, and I'm sure even with the infrastructure bill, but automakers themselves have been pledging to release more and more EVs the last many years. Tesla really has been at the forefront of this in the US. The Chinese have been working on EVs for the last 20 years as well. In fact, some of the biggest battery makers are in China, Korea, Japan. Um, and I think for the US, we have companies like Rivian, right, which has barely made a few electric cars, but the promise for EVs is so great that Rivian today is valued at like $140 billion, which
Yep.
is even more than VW, which owns the Audi brand, which owns VW, so many other car companies, and it's nearly a 100-year-old car company from Germany. So you can see the promise of EVs and even the Tesla valuation. So that really tells you there's something here that investors are liking, that people are also optimistic about. And like I've mentioned, every car company is either rolling out EVs, promising to replace all of their vehicles with electric vehicles, or at least have some of them be EVs in the next few years. So this is a huge push in the industry. With regards to the infrastructure bill itself, that's a really good point. I think the bill itself has a few different mechanisms to support electric vehicles. What it all leads to is closing the charging infrastructure gap that we have in this country. So there are reports from the ICCT, which I think they've done some of the best work here of identifying what are the gaps in charging infrastructure. In 2020, the US had about 200,000 charges across the country. That's nearly not enough. If you look at any ICCT report, it will tell you that if we are going to have 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% of the cars on the road today be EVs, then we need way more charging infrastructure. Most metro areas have 16% of the charging infrastructure that they need by 2030. So we really need to fill those gaps. Again, internationally, we've seen countries like Norway have a charger every 50 kilometers for people to use. We've seen again in China where they have, I think, over 1 million chargers across the country. So for the US, it's really important that we fix this charging gap now. And that's important for a few different reasons. It used to be that a Tesla owner was typically higher income. They live in a single occupancy house. Even if there was no charging infrastructure, they could at least charge at home. And Tesla's built out their own closed charging infrastructure network. We don't have this kind of situation for the new EV models. We don't have Mercedes, GM, Ford building out their own charging infrastructure. They're heavily relying on people to figure out charging for themselves. And even these people, are getting more and more diverse. So they're not living in single occupancy homes. They could be living in multi-unit dwellings. So that means they have to rely on their apartment building, or they have to rely on their workplace for their charging needs. So this is where, again, like public infrastructure, the workplaces, and really all the different, malls, gas stations, all of them have a very important role to play in increasing the charging infrastructure so that people are confident, and we reduce that range anxiety, and then we can see a higher adoption of EVs. So that's the kind of goal that this bill is trying to close, and they have about $10 billion set aside for EV charging infrastructure.
It's great. And you mentioned, I think you started talking about the workplace being a key player in EV charging and building out that infrastructure over time. And I want to dive more into that. What type of infrastructure benefits et cetera, can workplaces implement, and what should they be preparing for moving forward with this, impending huge growth in
Yeah,
EV usage
yeah,
and ownership?
absolutely. So workplace charging, I think, benefits everybody. So how does it benefit the workplace? It's going to help them reduce their scope 3 emissions. So if you have more and more electric miles driven versus gasoline miles driven, that's a big win for the workplace itself. Helps meet their sustainability goals, helps retain employees, especially these employees, again, are driving electric, live in a multi-unit dwelling. They really need that workplace. So it's a huge win for workplaces themselves. Second, and maybe less important, but nonetheless, the utility itself really benefits because for utility, right, you have kind of peak demand in the morning, peak demand at night times. But if there's workplace charging, they will see the charging
Mm.
of the vehicles throughout the workday, before those two peaks in between during the valley period, which is a big win for them as well. So you're not increasing the peaks, and they don't have to turn on these peaker plants, which tend to be really polluting. But instead, just using the base load itself, they can support charging. And then, of course, for the consumer itself. So if the next bill that President Biden is planning, the Build Back Better bill, in
Mhm.
that there is specific funding also for the user to have close to $12,500 in tax benefits for buying EV. So this is pretty huge from the consumer side that they now are able to buy an EV. And these benefits are really important because EVs today are still a bit more expensive. I mean, you have your Chevy Bolts, you have your Nissan Leafs, but still they tend to be a bit more expensive than a regular ICE vehicle. So we want to make them affordable. But again, workplace charging, I think for the user itself and for employees is amazing. Again, you retain the employees that are buying EVs. What we found is if someone has a charger at their workplace, they're 6 to 7 times likelier to buy an EV than not buying an EV. So the impact you have on the decision, right, to for your next car to buy an EV or not really depends on the workplace. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and maybe I could tell you a bit more of the electric vehicle adoption leadership program as well, so that it ties into
Yeah,
this.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So about 2 to 3 years ago, we really noticed, right, that workplace charging is missing, and this was pre-COVID when workplaces were still a thing. And now, as we see people coming back again, it's become important. Whereas a person is getting into work, what does that commuting experience look for them? And Andy, I'm sure you know, right? Like commuting is can be a really stressful thing for people. That's why workplaces spend so much time and effort to make it easy, seamless. The support carpooling, the support with parking, the support with incentives for transit, and workplace charging is going to be that key incentive for employers moving forward to give to their employees. So this is why I put together some of the industry leaders in workplace charging, companies like ABB, nonprofits like the Electrification Coalition, CalStart, utilities themselves like the Peninsula Clean Energy. We had people from cities, we had people from car charging companies like EVgo and others, Green Lots. So about 30 of us came together and created the recommendation and best practices for workplaces. And now it's become into this certification program. So very much like a US Green Business Council LEED certification, how green is your workplace? We've said how EV friendly, we've asked the question, how EV friendly is your workplace? And this is why we came up with a certification which really incentivizes and certifies organizations who are EV friendly. And that does not just stop at putting in a bunch of charging stations. It's really like, how do you treat your employees as they're looking to charge? Do you have a newsletter so that employees can coordinate with each other if they need to move vehicles? Or do you have smart charging infrastructure set up? How are you working with your utilities? Do you have an incentive program for your employees to reward them for driving EVs? So there's a bunch of all these different TDM programs that we've kind of incentives we've put together. And a lot of workplaces are really at the forefront of this. Companies like Genentech, or even here in the DC area, University of Maryland, they've been really forward thinking and how do you support your employees, your staff members, your students in the cases of universities, how do you support them driving EVs? And put together this list of incentives that we've seen the best organizations offer to their employees and made that into a certification where any organization can go in, take the certification, get support from Forth to get through that certification, meet some of the requirements, have all these templates and resources for them, and then be certified from a bronze up to a platinum level for how EV friendly they are.
I love that. I mean, that's great. I think we've had actually one of our earlier episodes, we had someone from ARC Scoru, which is a tech company that works with USGBC, US Green Building Council, on the lead certification side of things. And we've talked a lot about the idea of certifications as being something that can help, just help you kind of guide you towards the right, the right adoption of technologies. I think this is great. So this is called the Electric Vehicle Adoption Leadership, or EVAL, certification program, right?
Exactly. And then to your point on ArcScore, yes, of course, workplaces are actually really competitive. They always are comparing themselves, especially with these, benchmarking themselves against their peers. So if you tap into that, I think you can get some really positive results.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's great. Yeah, a little bit of a friendly competition. It definitely works.
Exactly.
So I'm excited to see that as well. And as a reminder to people who are listening or watching, if you are subscribed to our email list, which you can find at betweenthelines.io, we send out information with each of these episodes. So we'll certainly be sending out links to this eval program so you can look at it for your own company. Because we definitely, I'd love to see everyone start doing this. It sounds like it's a really cool idea.
Right.
So, Prachi, our last question, we ask everyone this question. So, I know we were talking before about what makes a good answer to this, and I don't really know. So we'll be seeing. I think we're going to be end up actually doing a review of everyone's final answer to this question, because it's always so interesting. But for you, I'd like to hear, why will workplace EV charging help save the planet?
That's a really good question. Well, so 30% of US emissions are because of the transportation sector. And if you're a workplace, if you have a fleet of vehicles you own, if your employees are driving to come to the workplace, I absolutely encourage you to put in a few charges in there, go through evalcertification.org, go through that certification and get certified, and start working towards EV adoption, because as we start to dial down from the 30% and start to reduce it, your role becomes really important to make sure we could do that.
That's perfect. Succinct. I mean, it is true. If we can all work towards getting this, EV future, it means less emissions out on the road, and workplaces seem to be a key player in that.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Well, Prachi, it's been great talking with you. To everyone listening and watching, thanks again for joining us this week. Like I just mentioned, if you haven't yet subscribed to our email list, you can do that at betweenthelines.io, and you can also find all of our old episodes. It's worth going back and checking out some of those. There's been a lot of great conversations over the last year. Definitely give us a like, a follow, a rating, whatever the appropriate means of engagement is with the particular platform you listen or watch Between the Lines. That does help us. And come back next week, as we will be continuing to look at, I think, a review of 2021 and seeing how all these conversations have gone and pulling that all together. So thanks again for joining me this week, Prachi. It's been a really great conversation. I'm really excited to see where eval goes and continue to see you as a leader in the field.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you all.
All right, we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Between the Lines with Andy Keaton. Be sure to subscribe to hear next week's episode and check out our exclusive commuter playlists on Spotify.